It's time to quit letting your gameplay comparisons look like hot garbage. Or if you want to feature old school game sprites, that looks like garbage too. Here's how to fix it. I'm going to show you how to do it in DaVinci Resolve, which is the best video editor to use for this because it gives you control over your scaling. Then I'm going to show you a hacky workaround for Premiere Pro, and then I'll show you what to do if you don't want to do that workaround for Premiere or you're using another video editor using a secondary program, which will unfortunately be Windows only. Let's jump in. Synth Rock Expansion Packs 1 and 2, now available on USB cassette tapes. Get a piece of backing track that tethers our classic roots to our modern streaming world, and get music to use in your streams and videos. Support our free music project by picking up a set for yourself, and get some free bootleg button pins with your order at glitch.mov/synthrock. Alright, first and foremost, of course, the quality of your capture matters. If you're doing true, pixel peeping comparisons, you need to be capturing in the 444 Chroma subsampling color space, which is just uncompressed color. This is very difficult to do. It requires very specific capture cards. I cover this very in depth in my OBS masterclass, linked in the description below if you want to go check that out, glitch.mov. But TLDR is you will need a capture card that supports it, like a Magewell capture card from the 4K era, or the Elgato 4K 60 Pro, Elgato 4K Pro, or AverMedia Live Gamer 4K, and then you'll need some very beefy graphics power like an RTX 4090, or to be on a Mac Studio here, which actually supports it pretty well overall using ProRes 444. The difference here, I'll just use a clip from my course real quick. Chroma subsampling is a technique used in digital images and video compression to reduce the amount of data needed to represent the color information. In simple terms, it's a way to make image and video files smaller without losing too much quality. Images and videos are made up of pixels, each pixel having a specific color and brightness level. The color of a pixel can be described using different components, such as brightness, luma, and color, chroma. Human eyes are much more sensitive to changes in brightness than color, which is the main idea behind chroma subsampling. Not color subsampling, but basically the same idea. Chroma subsampling works by reducing the resolution of the color, the chroma information, while keeping the brightness, luma information at full resolution. It does this by averaging or sharing color data from nearby pixels, which results in a smaller file size without a noticeable loss in quality most of the time. Common chroma subsampling ratios are written as 422, 420, and 444. But even if you have 420 color space, this can look a lot better than what it does here. What it comes down to is the default scaling algorithms, the math that they use to upscale your video when you're zooming in to show stuff like this, is designed around live action video, which needs a little sharpening, needs a little nudging to look good, but video gameplay footage typically doesn't. And so you see here, despite being a 444 4K capture here, we have all sorts of ringing and other artifacts that shouldn't be there because we captured the purest pixels ever. Well, in DaVinci Resolve, we need to go to our inspector panel. If you don't see this here, it is up at the top. Make sure you're on the edit tab, which is this third one at the bottom. Make sure you have the inspector section shown, and then scroll all the way to the bottom, retime and scaling, and then the bottom of that, resize filter. By default, project settings are set to sharper, which is what this is. This is, you kind of want to leave this on default. Like you could go in here, project settings, image scaling, and you could change the default for your projects and your default project setting and whatever to be nearest neighbor, but that's going to make your live action footage and everything else look kind of funky. So unless you only ever edit pixel art gameplay videos, I recommend not doing that. Instead, you need to change this on a clip-by-clip basis. If you haven't added your clip to the timeline, you can actually select them in your bin and then use the inspector panel to change this. Otherwise, if you have it on the timeline, you'll have to change it here. You're just going to have to remember to do this every time. That's just how it works. I don't always remember. You need to. This is also useful for screen capture footage for tutorials. Again, I have a whole episode of my OBS masterclass dedicated to this, but change the resize filter to nearest neighbor. This is nearest neighbor integer scaling, and as long as you are at a reasonable scale, it's going to look pretty clean. You can see here we are zooming in 10.680 times a 4K image on a 4K timeline, so we're still going to get some noise because it's not going to be super perfect. But if we drop that down to just 10, it looks a little bit cleaner. You also have the algorithm called Box, which is a similar algorithm which may or may not work a little bit better for these odd scales. Overall, it's about the best you're going to get. I was recording with HEVC encoding with this sample, which means there is still going to be some compression artifacting even at my best effort. But you can see here, it looks miles better than the default sharper one. Now those are some crispy, sharp pixels. Okay, so that's what the difference is here. This is a better example. This is recorded from the analog Super NT Mini Super Nintendo, which is HDMI, clean digital out. The link to the past footage here is recorded from my noisy actual hardware Super Nintendo. So that's why we got a little bit of extra artifacting here. But you can see here, the difference is, whoo! That's nearest neighbor. This box basically looks the same. This is the default. That looks like useless garbage. I would laugh at you if you're like, here's how the RetroTink 4K looks, and this is what you're showing. Nearest neighbor, whew, those are going to cut you. Wear gloves. The same thing can be said with a sprite PNG here. Again, this looks like absolute dog doo-doo. If we come down here and choose nearest neighbor, crisp. Look at how crisp, even if I zoom in again on my timeline. These are pure pixels, baby. Pure pixels. Ideally, if you could record your gameplay videos in raw PNG frames in 444 for every frame, that would be great. That would take up an absurd amount of space and be very hard to do. But that looks amazing. That looks way better than this. And usually the stuff I see in videos where they show old Pokemon sprites and stuff looks like this or even worse. So in Resolve, it is super easy. You choose nearest neighbor or box, and you get the sharpest. These pixels are going to cut you and make you bleed out level of quality here. All right, I'm going to show you the workaround for doing this in Premiere because it's pretty jank. Now, I will tell you up front, you do need After Effects paired with Premiere Pro for this to work. Premiere itself does not give you any sort of controls over your scaling process, which is frankly a nightmare. It really sucks. We are going to make sure we have our Effect Controls panel up here with our clip, and we're going to do the same thing with the transform tools. We're going to zoom in. I think it's just 1000% for 10 times. Doesn't use the same scaling factor. That looks pretty bad, doesn't it? Now, if you search in your effects and find the transform tool and drag that on, they start to get the right idea, those dear people over at Adobe, and they give you two filters for sampling, bilinear and bicubic. Bicubic is going to be a little better here. We'll do 1000%. Drag us up where we need to be. Apparently it's having memory issues. Okay, we can't even show it. It looked a little bit better with bicubic, but still not great. Instead, what you're going to have to do is nest it. You're going to have to dynamic link it over to After Effects. So you right-click the clip, go to Replace with After Effects Composition. This is a really dumb workaround, and it's going to render a lot slower, despite the fact that all you're doing is punching in on it. But if you're editing in Premiere still, this is what you're going to have to do. Again, after this, I will show you a way, which requires Windows, unfortunately, that you can do this with Virtual Dub and StaxRip real quick here. I hate to sound like a Resolve shill, but there's a reason I switched to it about 5 years ago after like 10 years with Premiere. Okay, we're going to save this. Now, with our clip selected here in After Effects, we can go to, we hit S for scale, and we're going to do 1000%. We're going to hit P for position. Again, drag it up. Again, the default looks pretty bad. And then you export it from After Effects. So File, Export, Add to Render Queue, not Adobe Media Encoder Render Queue. We're going to change High Quality, which on Mac is ProRes. And then you're going to go to Draft Settings for Render Settings. Draft Settings. This uses the nearest neighbor scaling algorithm. I'm going to set an output location. We're just going to movies. That's fine. And I'm going to go in here and make this super short so we don't have to wait forever. Make sure when you've chosen draft quality here for draft settings, you go, you click on it and change resolution to full. You still want quality on draft, but if you let it be resolution half, then you're rendering at half the resolution, and then you're still going to have to scale it in Premiere. So make sure you change resolution to full and click OK. And you can even click the drop down and choose Make Template. And just call this, because you want, yeah, quality draft resolution full. Call this nearest neighbor or integer render. And click OK. And now render it out. Back in Premiere, just by messing with it in After Effects, you can already see the quality has improved a fair bit. But now if we drag in our rendered copy, we get some pretty dang sharp results. Now, I'm going to flip over to Windows and show you how you can scale it before you edit. You just want to be more selective with your clips because it's going to take a while. If you're using another video editor or you're using Premiere and don't want to use the After Effects method, you're going to have to scale your footage before you start editing it. For this, I'm going to show you 3 free programs to use here on Windows for this. One of them, Lossless Cut, runs on Mac, but the two to actually do the scaling does not. So this is a Windows-only section here. When you do this, you're going to render out a second copy of your video, ideally in a very high quality, which is going to eat up a lot of space. So if possible, I recommend trimming the clip that you're actually going to scale with Lossless Cut. Lossless Cut is a free program that lets you trim out your video clips without re-encoding them, so you don't lose any extra quality from doing so. So we're going to drag on our Yoshi's Island clip here, and it's like a minute long. It's the same comparison. We don't need this, so we're going to come out to about 10 seconds. Just drag the little playhead here. We're going to click this button, the key here, to jump to the next keyframe after where we're at. And then we're going to click the finger here to set our endpoint. And you can do the same thing for an endpoint if you're wanting to do it later on. And then we just click export and export. And that's it. Since it's just splicing your video file, it doesn't need to do anything. So I'm going to call this Scale Me as our example. Now we're going to use first the free program called Virtual Dub 2. Virtual Dub allows you to scale your video footage using nearest neighbor and export it. The downside to Virtual Dub as a method for this is that it does not support modern codecs that compress efficiently, like HEVC or AV1 or anything. So you're only going to use big, fat AVI codecs that take up a lot of space. But we're going to go over here to Video Filters. We're going to add a filter. We're going to call this Resize. Okay? We want this to be 1000%, which is going to make an absurd video. Keep that in mind. And we can go ahead and letterbox and crop to size if you wanted to do that ahead of time, or crop to aspect ratio. We're going to crop to 4:3. Actually, it's going to be what, 5 to 8:7, 8:5. See, I don't remember with Super Nintendo. I'm going to say don't. And then under filter mode, we just want nearest neighbor, and that is going to scale the video up 10 times with nearest neighbor filtering. Click OK. We click OK. File. Save video. And we're going to save a new copy of this video. But again, we are scaling to 10 times 4K here. This is going to take up a stupid amount of space. We're going to go here, and we're just going to call this on our desktop Virtual Dub Scaled 10x. In for nearest neighbor. And save. Yeah, it's producing too big of a frame. So if you are already sourcing 4K footage, that might not work. But what we can do is we can go back to our filters. This is very useful for upscaling to 4K from, say, 1080p or native 480p, 480i, whatever. All right, an easier way to handle zooming in with Virtual Dub, I just wanted to show the ridiculousness of the scenario, but is to make a new 4K timeline with that original recording. So right-click, new sequence from clip, and then take a screenshot. Screenshot button right here below the player, export frame. We're going to save this to, I'm going to save it to this so I can bring it over on the computer. We're going to save it just as a TIFF. Click OK. And then you don't got to worry. And then come over here to Photoshop, Affinity, whatever photo editor you may be using. Drag on that TIFF. Now crop to the section that you plan on doing comparisons with. So for example, if we just want this little bit and we know we're fine with working with this in our video, it doesn't work if you want the full frame. We just crop to it. We're not resizing here in Photoshop. We are just cropping. So I just want to figure out the resolution of this. Go to Image, Image Size, change it to pixels, and we are looking at 608 by 658. So then what you can do, we don't need any of this in Photoshop. You don't even have to save it. We just needed that number, 608 by 658. We can come back to Premiere here, right-click our sequence, go to Sequence Settings, and we'll make this 608 by 658. Click OK, and then we just need to move it around. Don't resize it, just move it around to get that bit that we wanted, which was perfectly centered here. So about there. Now we export this. So Command M, Control M usually does it. Now here you need to be using a codec that supports 444 Chroma subsampling just to be safe. So Apple ProRes 4444 is ideal, and we are going to export this as Premiere crop.mov and export. And then we'll bring this back into Virtual Dub and the other program that I show you. Now Virtual Dub has finished. We ended up with a 246 gigabyte file that isn't even what we wanted in the first place because it only got halfway. Instead, we're going to do this with the cropped in version that we just did. So we're going to say File, Close Video File, and we're going to drag in the crop that I just showed you how to make. Drag that on. Filters should still be applied, but again, if you missed it, come over here. We're going to do 1000%. Relative percent 1000 for 10x zoom. Same as source, nearest neighbor, and we don't need to crop this time. So that gives us about a 6K by 6.5K file, which Virtual Dub should be able to work with. We click OK. Now those are more or less some super sharp, crispy pixels. I'm digging it. File. Save video. Virtual Dub -crop -scale. We are going to change the format. We are going to do a UT video. If you have it installed, I'll have it linked below as a great codec to use here. You can use X265 from FFmpeg, but it does not give you the GPU encoders, which is really annoying. We're going to go ahead and use Apple ProRes here since that's what I have. We're going to change pixel format to YUV444. Yep, that is what we want. No change there. Oh, it doesn't let me... Actual output. Why can't I? That's frustrating. Huh. Okay, we won't use ProRes. We will use GoPro Cineform. Why won't that let me use? That's weird. I don't know why it won't let me use the 444 modes here. Interesting. Well, if that's the case, then yeah, we're just using uncompressed RGB 444. All right. Okay, and save. And we're going to let this do its thing. I may have to transcode this to ProRes 444 to use on the Mac, but on most PC video editors should be fine. And this is going to go a lot quicker because it's scaling a low resolution to a high resolution rather than a high resolution to an absurdly high resolution. But it will still take a while, and it will still eat up space. You can see here we are churning through space. Uncompressed RGB is not to be messed with if you're space conscious. All right, now the Virtual Dub copy is done. We just had a little 10-second export here on our desktop, and we have Virtual Dub crop scale. It is still 76 gigabytes for the 10 seconds. Oh, I'm sorry, 73 gigabytes. But you can see here we do have the video file. VLC is having a hard time playing something so massive and so data heavy. But in your video editor, you can generate a proxy or whatever and be totally fine. Alternatively, if you want the option to do something like this, but still compress it to a GPU encoder to run a little faster and be a little smaller and stuff, we're going to use StaxRip, another free program. This one is like Handbrake in that it is a video transcoding pipeline, but it has some more kind of unique processing options that Handbrake doesn't give to you. So we're going to, again, drag in our Premiere crop, which I did not trim when I rendered this, so I need to see if this will give me the option. It is not going to. So actually, I'm going to, once again, use the lossless cut here. So this looks really intimidating, and it's a train wreck of a UI, if I'm totally honest, but you don't need to worry about too much. So these are the filters, this section here. The filters are anything you are doing to the video. So for example, it says convert to YUV 420. We don't want that. We want it to stay 444. We're going to right-click in this space, add, resize, advanced. Actually, no, we're just going to do normal resize. Here we go. Now we have all of these options. We want point resize. Point is the closest we can get here to nearest neighbor. And typically point is nearest, it typically is a name for nearest neighbor or integer scaling. So we want that. Then we're going to come over here to our scale here, the resize section. And we're going to drag this up until we get to, looks like we cap out at 200. Let's see if we can go further. We did 10 times scale for our virtual dub scale. So we can grab the resolution from that. If I open this with, do I have media info? I don't. Go to properties, details, 6080 by 6. Oh, well, duh. Literally multiply by 10. 60 by 6580. It is having a weird issue with that. Must be divisible by 8. Darn H.264 and 5 encoders. All right, so 658 times 8. We'll do an 8 times scale. So 5264. And then we need 608 times 8. That's still plenty to let our video editor do the rest. 4864. Bam, we can do that. All right, here is your codec settings, your container and your codec, the encoder you were encoding the video with. With Virtual Dub, we just did straight uncompressed video, super bulky. With StaxRip, we get access to our graphics card-based encoders, which are going to run really fast and compress better. I am on an RTX 4080, I believe, on this test bench here. Yeah, 4080, which means I have access to NVIDIA's AV1 and H.265 encoders. I recommend using H.265 if you don't have brand new hardware. You can use that. And then we're just going to use MP4 container, which means we have to change our audio codec, which is fine. We don't even need audio, but it's going to throw a fit regardless, so that's fine. We will do an FFmpeg container of MOV. So for encoder options, preset doesn't really matter. Bit depth doesn't really matter. We want YUV 444. Again, we want to maintain that 444 chroma subsampling. None of the rest of this really matters. We're going to do constant quality mode. So I guess that does matter. CQP, constant quality. 18 is good. That is fine. So first step, come up here, constant QP. Second step, color space, YUV 444. Click OK. If you're using another graphics card, say AMD, again, still use H.265. This time go to mode constant QP. 18 is still fine. It will not let you do 444, however. AMD encoders do not let you do that. So if you are worried about scaling it further in your edit with that, then I'd recommend using X265. And you can come to options and you want main 44410. You get the idea. I have lots of encoder guides on my channel if you need that. But we're going to do constant QP 18 YUV 444. And then here's where you select where it goes. So we're going to say browse, and we're going to call this StaxRip-8x scale. And we're going to plop that on my desktop, save, and add job, and start. And we're going to let that go. Oh, there we go. Okay, don't freak out if it does that. Sometimes it takes a minute to load up, but now it's encoding the video. So I'll show you a comparison of what our results ended up with, but that is the gist of it. You want to scale with nearest neighbor, point, area, integer, whatever the tools you have access to calls it, and you want to keep it as uncompressed and in 444 as possible as you go through. And this is already almost done. So we can close StaxRip. Now we have our file here. I will open that with VLC. Boom. Them some sharp, crispy pixels. Them some pickles. And that is how you don't embarrass yourself when working with pixel art games, sprites, or doing punch-in comparisons. This is very important. I want to make sure this information is out there. I've been trying to preach it for honestly years at this point, but given the revived, interest in these kinds of retro scalers and things like that, I thought it was more important than ever to put a video out there. Go ahead and click this video if you want to see my thoughts on the newest retro scaler, the RetroTink 4K, and why it is absolutely amazing. Or click this video over here to get my thoughts on why you shouldn't focus on a grind too much and on how to avoid burnout with my liminal musing series over on Lost Saves called There's Always Tomorrow. Remember to be kind, rewind.